All right, folks, gather round a little closer to the blaze. Let the shadows dance and the night air prickle your skin, 'cause the story I'm about to unfurl ain't for the faint of heart. This here's a tale from the deep woods of Tennessee, a place just outside the holler near White Bluff. It's a patch of forest where the trees lean in like they're sharing secrets, and the air, well, the air hangs heavy, like a damp shroud, always feeling like a pair of unseen eyes are boring right into the back of your neck. This, my friends, is the hunting ground of the White Bluff Screamer, a story so dark, so chilling, it'll seep into your marrow and leave you cold. Welcome to Kentucky Melody, where the fire's warm, but the nights are cold, and something is always watching. Now, this here story, it ain't some newfangled spook tale. It starts way back in the bitter heart of the winter of 1923. A feller named Samuel Grayson, tired of the city's hustle and clang, decided to move his wife, Margaret, and their whole passel of 7 young'uns out to them woods. Samuel was a sturdy man, a hard-working soul, just wanting a simple life to raise his children in the quiet embrace of nature. So, he put his back into it and built them a snug little cabin, right there at the edge of the holler, with them ancient Tennessee trees standing guard all around. Now, the folks in the nearby town, they tried to warn him. Oh, they told him, "Samuel, that holler ain't no place for decent folk. There's things that dwell in them woods, things that'll make a man curse the day he ever set foot there." But Samuel, being the headstrong sort he was, he just chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. Just old wives' tales, he'd tell 'em, waving a dismissive hand. Ain't nothing out there but raccoons and foxes kicking up a fuss in the night. But let me tell you, as the sparks fly up from this here fire, Samuel Grayson couldn't have been more wrong. Dead wrong. It was just their second night in that new-built cabin, the scent of fresh-cut pine still hanging in the air when the Grayson family first heard it. A scream. And I ain't talking about no panther cry or fox bark. This was a sound so unnatural, so steeped in raw pain and seething anger, it'd make the hackles on a hound stand up stiff as needles. It started like a whisper on the wind far off in the dense woods, but it clawed its way closer and closer until it sounded like whatever was making it was right there, just beyond their cabin door, baying at the moon. The little ones, they woke up wailing, clutching onto their mama, Margaret, who herself was shaking like an aspen leaf in a winter storm. Samuel, trying to put on a brave face for his kin, grabbed his trusty rifle from over the mantel and eased the door open, stepping out onto the porch. He stood there a spell, his breath misting white in the frigid night air, peering into the inky blackness. But the woods, they'd fallen deathly silent. Too silent, if you catch my drift. The kind of silence that screams louder than any noise. The frogs had choked off their croaking, the crickets had hushed their chirping, and even the wind seemed to be holding its breath, listening. When Samuel came back inside, stamping the cold off his boots, he tried to sound unconcerned. "Probably just some old bobcat caught in a fix," he said, his voice a bit too loud. But Margaret, she could see it in his eyes, that flicker of doubt, that chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. He didn't believe that, no more than she did. Over the next few nights, them awful screams got worse, became a nightly torment. They'd commence every evening just as the sun bled out of the sky, sending its last orange fingers through the trees. The sound would echo through that holler like some tormented soul was being ripped apart again and again. Then Margaret started seeing something else. Out by the dark tree line where the shadows lay thickest, she'd catch a glimpse of a pale figure drifting like smoke between the ancient oaks and hickories. It had the shape of a woman, she reckoned, wearing something long and white that seemed to billow and sway, only there weren't a lick of wind to stir it. She'd just stand there, a silent sentinel, watching the cabin, never moving much, never making a sound herself. But every blessed time that figure vanished back into the gloom, the screaming would start up again, louder, more desperate than before. Samuel. He saw her one night, too. He'd taken to sitting on the porch with his rifle laid across his knees, determined to face whatever it was. And there she was, gliding out of the impenetrable dark like a wisp of fog, her eyes. Her eyes seemed to glow with a faint, eerie light, like cold lanterns in the pitch black. He tried to call out, to ask who she was, what she wanted, but his throat just seized up, dry as dust. When he finally gathered his wits enough to raise his rifle, she just dissolved. Like smoke on the wind, she was gone. That very night, the older kids started whispering about shadowy shapes flitting past their windows, and the youngest, little Mary, she woke up crying, saying she heard someone. A soft voice calling her name from the dark woods. Now, if a spectral woman and her blood-curdling screams weren't enough to send a shiver down your spine, it weren't long before something else began to stir in them cursed woods. One night, while the whole family was huddled inside, the fire roaring in the hearth more for comfort than for warmth, they heard it. Heavy footsteps crunching through the frosted leaves outside. This wasn't no deer, no sir. This was something big, something with weight, moving with a purpose. Then came a terrible crash from the lean-to barn Samuel had built for their mule. Samuel and his oldest boy Thomas, a brave lad of 16, grabbed their rifles and burst out the door, hearts pounding like drums. What they saw in the pale, cold moonlight, well, it froze them right where they stood. Looming there by the splintered barn door was a creature, a monstrous thing, bigger and bulkier than any black bear they'd ever laid eyes on. It was covered head to toe in shaggy, matted white fur, almost glowing in the moonlight, and its eyes burned a hellish red, like the embers of a dying campfire. Its claws, glimpsed in the moonlight, were long and wickedly sharp, and its powerful jaws curled back in a guttural snarl that turned Samuel's blood to ice water. The thing let out a roar then, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet, a roar that echoed the fury of the screamer. Then, with a terrifying agility for its size, it turned and lumbered back into the black maw of the trees. Samuel, his hands shaken but his will firm, fired a shot after it, the crack of the rifle breaking the awful spell. But the creature, it didn't so much as flinch, just disappeared into the darkness that had birthed it. By now, Samuel Grayson had had more than his fill. This wasn't no simple life. This was a living nightmare. He loaded his terrified wife and children into their wagon at first light and hightailed it into town, straight to the preacher's house, seeking sanctuary and sense. when he recounted the horrors they'd endured, the unholy screams, the spectral woman, the monstrous beast, the old preacher, a man who'd seen much in his years, just nodded his head slowly, his face grim. "Son," the preacher said, his voice low and solemn, "you've gone and settled your family on cursed land. That holler, it's been haunted for as long as any soul in these parts can recall, and longer still. The old tales say there's a woman's ghost out there, the spirit of a soul consumed by vengeance. She was murdered, you see, her life stolen from her in a brutal way. Too soon, too cruel. Now her restless soul roams them woods, screaming out her unending rage and sorrow at any living thing that dares intrude. And that beast you saw?" The preacher leaned in, his eyes dark. "That's her guardian, her protector, a creature of fang and claw, some say called up from the dark places of the earth to shield her restless spirit from any who'd disturb her." Samuel, though shaken to his core, was a man of grit. And the preacher, he was a man of God. Joined by a few brave, or perhaps foolhardy, men from the town, they decided they couldn't let such an evil fester so close. They armed themselves with rifles, sturdy torches that cut swaths through the encroaching dusk, and the good book itself, and they headed back toward that dreaded holler. As true night fell, black as pitch under the dense canopy, the forest seemed to come alive with that awful, soul-shattering wail. The ghostly woman appeared first, a shimmering apparition floating between the gnarled trees, her eyes burning with an ethereal light as she let out her mournful, terrifying cry. The men, they tried praying, shouting verses from the Bible into the oppressive darkness, their voices cracking with a mix of faith and fear. But it just seemed to rile her up more, her screams growing more intense. Then, with a sound like a freight train derailing, came the beast crashing through the underbrush, its red eyes fixed on the intruders. The men fired their rifles, the shots ringing out, but the bullets, that seemed to pass right through the shaggy form or bounce off its hide like pebbles. The preacher, seeing their plight, yelled for Samuel, "Fire, son! Use fire against it. Some evils cannot abide the flame." Samuel, remembering the lantern he still carried, acted on pure instinct. With a desperate prayer, he hurled his lit lantern at the monstrous creature. It struck true, the oil igniting the beast's matted fur. The creature let out a howl so deafening, so filled with agony and rage, it made the mighty oaks themselves tremble. Engulfed in flames, the beast turned and fled, crashing and howling its way deep into the black heart of the woods. And as it did, the ghostly woman, her form flickering, let out one final heart-stopping scream, a sound that seemed to tear the very fabric of the night, before vanishing in a swirl of dissipating mist. The Grayson family, they never set foot back in that holler. Not for their cabin, not for their belongings, not for nothing. And since that terrible night, nobody else has ever dared to try and settle there, but folks around White Bluff. They say that on cold, still nights, when the moon is hid and the wind is just right, you can still hear those mournful screams echoing through them woods. And sometimes, if you're real unlucky, or maybe just foolish enough to go looking, you might catch a glimpse of two malevolent red eyes watching you from the deepest, darkest shadows. So, if y'all ever find yourself wandering the backwoods near White Bluff, Tennessee, you listen good to an old man's advice. Stay out of that holler. Some places hold on to their pain, and some things in this world just ain't meant to be disturbed. And so, the legend of the White Bluff Screamer still lingers like a bad omen in them Tennessee woods. Whether it's the mournful cries of that restless spirit, or the burning eyes of that beast stalking the trees, one thing's for certain. Some stories just don't want to stay buried. But we ain't afraid to dig 'em up here. Now, I gotta ask y'all something. Have you ever heard a scream in the woods that didn't sound quite right? One that made your blood run cold and your feet want to move before your brain even caught up? Or maybe you've seen something. A shadow where no shadow ought to be. A flicker out the corner of your eye that vanished the moment you turned. Drop your tale in the comments below, especially if you're from Tennessee or ever wandered near White Bluff. We want to know what you reckon is really out there. Is it the restless ghost of a murdered woman, some ancient protector beast born of sorrow and rage, or just the land itself, holding a grudge too old to name? We read every story, every whisper, every warning. And if you enjoyed sitting by the fire with us tonight, don't forget to tap that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell so you don't miss the next twisted tale we dig up from the dirt. Check out our Scary Stories from Kentucky playlist for more bone-chilling tales close to home. Or head over to America's Scariest Stories to hear legends that stretch from the Smokies to the Sierras. And remember, friend, if you hear a scream in the night, don't go looking. Just keep walking, fast. Until next time, stay warm, stay wary, and always keep a light burning.